With his body submerged in the red liquid, our boy slowly began to open his eyes, his mind filled with confusion, questions, and sadness. Vakir was alone in this place, an empty place where there was nothing but red liquid as far as the eye could see. Our boy began to remember Cane Corso swinging his sword with precision and strength. The cut was so fast that Vakir didn't even have time to react. Vakir began to stare at his hand, his eyes shining with sadness and disappointment. He was sure that, in the fight with Cane Corso, his 7th technique had been shattered by Cane's 9th, and he had taken it head-on. Just then, his eyes widened in surprise, sending him into shock. Didn't know what was happening or what this place was. With a face full of confusion and fear, Vakir propped himself up on his hands, sat up, and began to pant heavily, wondering if he was dead. With eyes shining in terror, Vakir slowly began to raise his head. Our boy's attention was fixed on something bright, and his fearful expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but feel confused, not knowing what was happening. As far as the eye could see, there was only red liquid. But in the midst of the vast liquid and darkness, Vakir noticed a glowing door. Vakir fell silent, his mind flooded with fear, wondering if this was the line of death Cane Corso had spoken of. Vakir began to remember the words of Cane Corso, the Death Knight, that it was through the fight with the basilisk on the line of death that he had awakened the 8th Baskerville technique. Desperately longing to survive, our boy stood up and began to walk slowly through the liquid toward the glowing door. Vakir approached the door and, as his eyes shone with surprise, he clenched his fist. He reasoned that if this door meant death, the fact that he hadn't crossed, it meant he wasn't dead. Vakir reached out his hand and began to ponder in silence, not knowing what to do now. He started to stare at his hand, and his eyes widened with relief. It was a comfort not to be dead. But he also recognized that this resembled what Cane called destiny, the 10th technique of the Baskervilles. Vakir began to remember the tree where the monster's corpse lay, and when he was struck by one of Cane Corso's techniques, causing a terrible pain that traveled throughout his body. Resting his hands on the pommel of his sword, with a calm expression, Cane explained to our boy that he could reach the end of the 10th style of the Baskervilles, and to do so, he had to experience death in his fight with him. Vakir clenched his fist and began to stare at his reflection in silence, lost in thought. His eyes began to shine with sadness, wondering if this was what Cane Corso had been referring to. Vakir began to remember his past life, his death at the guillotine and his return to the past as a baby. He then understood that if it was as Cane Corso had said, he, by being beheaded before his regression, had fulfilled the death condition of the 9th technique, and through the regression itself, by returning from the dead, he had experienced the condition of the 10th technique. Remembering his horrible death and past life, Vakir couldn't help but feel furious and grit his teeth tightly. He knew he was the only being in existence, the person chosen by consumed by hatred and rage. Vakir fell to the ground, forcefully striking the red liquid as he screamed a curse, for the very idea seemed like a mockery to him. As the glowing door illuminated the dark place, Vakir calmed down a bit, questioning if his death, his life, and everything he had strived for so hard was nothing more than something chosen by destiny. At that moment, hands made of energy began to emerge from the liquid and cling to our body. The only thing Vakir could do was clench his fist and feel even more furious, as he remembered the oath he made during his fight with Madam. He would not live a life dragged along by others again. Slowly, the hands began to grip Vakir's body. He remained silent, consumed by rage. He offered no resistance as the hands submerged his body into the red liquid. As the hands slowly began to drag our boy to the bottom, Vakir started to remember his past, his fight against the true Madam, his fierce battle with the demon Andromelius, and his struggle against the other elite corpses. These memories consumed Vakir's mind, causing him to lose strength and let himself be pulled down by the spiritual hands. He wondered if it had all been his own illusion, if everything he had fought for, risking his life until now, was meaningless. Still, he admitted that if he finally managed to reach the 10th technique of the Baskervilles, it would be a reason for joy, because it was the state he had longed for his entire life. Vakir couldn't help but question if this would be enough. In the midst of this desperation, Vakir began to remember the words of the Death Knight Cane Corso, and he wondered what the point of achieving the 10th technique would be, recalling that, as Cane had said, it meant being trapped here and enduring an indefinite amount of time. Just then, memories of the battle against the 10 elite corpses came to Vakir's mind. The scene was horrible, with human corpses everywhere and swords stuck in the ground. At that moment, Vakir's eyes widened in surprise as a light of hope appeared before his eyes. The image of his father, his family, the members of the Balak tribe, and his friends came to his mind. Among them was also Perry, the orphan who had been killed by one of the 10 elite corpses. As always, she showed a pleasant smile. From the depths of the red liquid, bubbles began to emerge, and not long after, more bubbles appeared. Vakir's eyes began to shine with rage, causing him to grit his teeth if his power was what had forged his destiny and it endangered the people he needed and wanted to protect. Then he would use this very destiny for them, and not for the tower. Vakir emerged from the red liquid and began to shout, knowing he had to set them free. His eyes began to glow with determination, for the place he was meant to be was not the tower, but right beside them. He had to get out of here alive. Now our boy concentrated, and the liquid transformed into a tornado, which began to spin at high speed. Slowly, the tornado began to transform into a sword made of blood. As a powerful mana was emerging from it, Vakir began to extend his hand toward that which could only be taken by one who has faced death on the border of the line of death. Vakir grabbed the sword, and it began to emit an intense yet powerful light. His eyes shone with seriousness, knowing that this was the 8th technique, the key that opened the door of death. He gripped the sword, his eyes filled with determination, wasting no more time. He decided it was time to leave this place. Vakir swung the sword with force and, determined to protect everyone, plunged it into the glowing door. Vakir began to turn the sword as if it were a key, and at that moment, a powerful flash of light, capable of blinding any swordmaster, began to emerge from the door. At the same time, in reality, Vakir's body lay inside a crater formed by the Death Knight's powerful attack. The knight himself stood nearby, observing our boy with disappointment. It seemed Vakir had lost his life, as the ground was covered in blood and he had deep cuts all over his body. Disappointed, Cane Corso turned his back on Vakir's corpse and decided to return to his throne. Several seconds passed, and noticing that Vakir wasn't moving, he mentioned with an admiring expression that Vakir was undoubtedly an extraordinary child, but in the end, he couldn't awaken his powers. At that moment, Vakir stood up, and an intense yet godly mana began to emerge from his body. Noticing this, Cane Corso froze in shock, his eyes widening in surprise. With a confused gaze, Cane turned around, recognizing the aura instantly. It was that of the 8th technique. He realized the rookie had done it. While Cane was distracted, Vakir seized the opportunity and, with his eyes glowing, appeared behind him, ready to continue the fight. Cane's eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't believe what his eyes were witnessing. Just before Vakir could attack, the Death Knight unsheathed his sword and deflected the attack. Our boy retreated, knowing this wasn't good. The force of the impact sent Kane's body back several meters. He began to stare at the ground, unable to believe he was losing to a brat who had just reached the 8th technique. As his eyes glowed with rage, he began to stare at our boy, acknowledging that even so, he still had a long way to go. This was merely the 8th technique. His true destiny was the 10th technique. Just before Kane could finish speaking, Vakir shouted that he accepted the challenge of a destiny capable of reaching the 10th form of Baskerville. Vakir lifted his head and, while panting heavily, mentioned that for now he had to leave the tower. There were things he needed to do, and for that, he had to stay alive. Kane's eyes widened in confusion and surprise, wondering what he meant by things to do. The Death Knight watched attentively as a powerful mana emerged from Vakir's body, understanding that it wasn't just survival instinct, but a purpose for which he was bound to live. But even if that were the case, for him, it wasn't enough. Kane gripped his sword tightly and began to stare at Vakir, making it clear that as long as the tower held him prisoner, he could never leave. At that moment, the tower door slowly began to open. The attention of both Vakir and Kane was fixed on it, their eyes widening in surprise. The tower door opened completely, letting in the sunlight and the wind. Kane remained silent, lost in thought. Noticing that the door had opened on its own, he wondered if this could really be possible. With a serious gaze, Vakir began to show his sword. He wondered what kind of trick this was, and if Kane intended to distract him for a surprise attack. As the wind was blowing, Kane revealed that it was not. Perhaps this fight had come this far by the will of the tower. Kane closed his eyes, telling our boy to leave. He admitted that he was right, that his destiny was not here, but outside the tower. This was the will of the tower, of the Tomb of Swords. He lamented that it wanted the boy to leave while condemning him to an eternal prison, leaving him unsure of his own liberation. At that moment, Vakir began to shout, questioning if Kane wanted him to kill him with the 10th Baskerville technique. Hearing this, Kane's eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't believe what Vakir had just said. With an expression full of determination, our boy promised that if he reached the 10th Baskerville technique, he would free him with this sword, so he must wait. A smile spread across Kane's face. He understood that destiny flowed one way or another, and he decided he would wait. As the wind blew, stirring up dust from the ground, Vakir mentioned that he had a question and inquired if Kane was the one who broke the book of lurking ambush swordsmanship. Vakir began to stare at the ground, asking him why he had done it. Kane began to disappear into the dust, attributing this also to the will of the tower. The dust began to spread throughout the tower, and not long after, the tower disappeared without a trace, freeing Vakir. Our boy stood in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. The small spider came out of its hiding place and sat on our boy's shoulder. With an expression full of joy, she got his attention. Vakir's eyes widened with curiosity as he noticed he held the specter's tree in his hand. Vakir began to observe it carefully, realizing that, apparently, Kane knew from the beginning that he was looking for this. A proud smile spread across his face, although there were many unexpected twists. With this, the mission was complete. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,